Yeah, I guess so. Are we starting right at 5:15?
You
Or
just
do,
let me know when you start.
well, if we give a few more minutes for more people to come in, is that possible?
It's all good.
Okay. Wasn't sure if you had to stick to the online live streaming schedule.
You're on, but there's a screen that just sits until you're ready.
Okay. Are you able to tell if anybody's viewing it remotely? If anybody's on there? Are we getting any guests?
It just started, so there's probably no one yet.
Okay. This is a rough time going right after lunch.
That was me yesterday.
People's lunch conversations are still going on, I think, too.
The room filled up about 10 minutes after.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still.
Yeah, because I talked to a few people that said they wanted to be in here for this, so I wasn't sure if it's clear to them what time. Well, I guess we can't wait too long. What do you think? You guys are the only ones here. You want to get started? Pretty excited. Everybody's just in here napping, thought they were going to be in a dark room that out of the corner from everybody, and I'm interrupting. Okay, should we get started? You on? Okay. Okay, Gunakshish, Shikukwan, Skistinkwan, Nanyayi, Gunakshish. My name's Eric Hollinger. My Tlingit name is Duck Wu. I'm adopted Ducklawadi clan from Hoots-Nuwu-Kwan. And I'm a tribal liaison in the repatriation office of the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. The Smithsonian is the world's largest museum complex. We now have 21 museums, and we are still adding more. 2 more have been designated and are being planned now to find a site for them. We have 155 million cataloged items and counting, and that can be the space shuttle can be one, and a flea could be one. The catalog numbers can include many. The Natural History Museum has about 145 million items in its collection, so it have the majority of the Smithsonian's collections, and that includes everything from snails and giant squids to cultural objects. In the anthropology department, we have around 3 million cataloged items, and of those, about 1,500 are Tlingit, 1,500 are Haida as well, so very large collections. The Museum of the National Museum of the American Indian, our sister museum, also has very large Tlingit collections. And although I think in my title it said Tlingit Smithsonian Collections, it'll really be focused on the Tlingit collections from Wrangell in the Natural History Museum. And I know Wrangell has carried out some repatriations from the Museum of the American Indian relatively recently and is aware of their collections, what they have. But I want to make sure that people in Wrangell are aware of what the Natural History Museum has in its collections. And so I will show you just some of the images of some of those. And I know Virginia Oliver has visited the Smithsonian with a Tlingit delegation a few years ago and captured images of many of these objects and brought them back for talks that she's given on the material that's there. So kind of a range of items. Diving whale pattern, chokat robe, good condition, gaming sticks. This bentwood box, I believe this is actually on exhibit now in the Anchorage Museum of Nature and Science, and this is said to have once belonged to Chief Shakes. Clubs, shaman's hairpins, bear paws, more hairpins. So really kind of a little bit of a mixture of different material culture types from all over the southeast. One or two of each different types of objects, not a real concentration in any one type of item. Fire starting kit, you can see the flint and pyrite there. Double-headed dagger, fish clubs, some weavings, not too many weavings, paintbrush, combs, nice bentwood box, more clubs, lots of clubs from Wrangell. Some stonework. All of these items that start with the catalog number E, it stands for ethnology. It means they were obtained from living people. And sometimes when we see stone artifacts like this, it might be an archaeological context, but if these have an E in front of them, it means they likely were obtained from living people and not collected from archaeological contexts. Well, these are the kind of things that would be common in an archaeological context. And soapberry spoons. Everybody has to have lots of soapberry spoons, right? And some of the more interesting items, this bear helmet, it was said to have been owned by Jim Cooney, and I was researching his name a little bit, and I think it may be James Cooney, who was a Kachadi clan member. And I think this was, Swanton wrote about this and published a photograph of this in 1908. And he talked about this being a bear that was in an ancestor's tradition where he had killed this grizzly bear with an axe to the head. And on the top of this is actually a slot that looks like a hatchet had gone into it. That's, I think, depicting the wound that killed the bear. But Swanton was not sure if this was a personal crest or belonged to another clan, because he was not familiar with the bear being associated with the Kachadi clan. So he wondered if they actually originated with another clan. This shark hat, which is actually really big, hard to tell in this scale, was a little bit of a puzzler for us because that fin looked a little bit different. And Harold Jacobs and I, we were looking at this image, famous image of Chief Shake's house, and trying to see, it looked like there's a shark there that looks very similar to it, but it threw us off because that fin didn't look right, didn't match this. But in actuality, that's the fin probably that was in the center of it. And what our photographers had done, they didn't know these fins were not attached. They had set it up to where that, you can see here, the side fins, the lateral fins are separated too. And this is the way it actually looked when it was collected. Swanton published this photograph, and our later photographers were trying to put these pieces together. So that kind of threw us off, and we have to kind of come back to the deeper history of these objects. So it really does look like it is it is the hat in that photograph. And actually, if we go back to that photograph, if we get a close look at it, that fin that was on it is actually there by that stovepipe, partially hidden by that stovepipe. So it's a little hard to tell that that's actually still attached to it. It has a long, kind of, what do you call it, rubberized canvas, almost like old raincoat style, for a trailer there. And its slot back here, oh, can't see my cursor on there. There's a slot back at the end of that trailer. That's where that second long fin was that represented the tail fin. That rubberized canvas is really falling apart now. It's really brittle. This shark hat also looks very much like some of the pictures there. And this is what it looked like when it was first collected, that Swanton published in 1908. and both of these were attributed to formerly having been owned by sheikhs. Now, a particularly interesting item in the collections, and some of these I want to talk about not just to make clear that they're there, if you're interested in these, but some clearly have the potential for much larger, longer-term collaborative projects for cultural restoration. And I think these bear screens are one of them. They're listed as beavers, and Swanton published these saying that they represented the beavers of the mythical beaver of Killisnoo. And that's all he said about them. And he didn't say where they came from and in his publication. But Viola Garfield in 1945 or so published an article in American Anthropologist that said that these were the screens from the end of the trail house, the Deshitan in Angoon. And so since the 40s, everybody thought these screens were beaver screens from Angoon. They kind of look like they have buck teeth. And when we researched it, we actually found the record said that they were from Wrangell, and they were purchased from Mrs. Robert Shadesty. And we actually found Viola Garfield's notes and letters she wrote in the 1950s to the director of the Denver Museum talking about screens where she said she made a mistake because the people she talked to in Angoon about those beaver screens, the screens actually had a hole in the screen to pass through. So this could not have been the screen. She was misinformed about it. They looked similar to it. And people in Angoon that we talked to, they said they thought they'd seen pictures of beaver screens before, but no one has found one that looks like this. But the record looks pretty clear that it's from Wrangell, and we think it may be a bear instead. This is what it looks like now. So when they came in, there are actually two screens. This is just one of them. These are 14 feet long by 7 feet high, and there were two of them like this. When they came to the Smithsonian in the early 1900s, they cut them in half. And so there are 4 beaver screens now that represent each of these pieces. And one was exhibited high up in the Arts and Industries building for many decades. And then because they are separated now, and they reframed them. So you can actually see where they painted lines, dividing lines there. The museum staff did at some point in their history that kind of divided them and framed them as if they were a discrete picture where no lines had existed on that original that you saw. Even though that's a poor black and white photo, we can still tell these have been modified from that. This red paint is new. That paint matches the paint on the frame. We did XRF analysis on the paint on the frames, and it matches what was put on there, so the museum people put that red on there to enhance it or to bring it out. Maybe they thought it was originally in red. The black we think is original. The black on there looks like it's still the original and still holding up, but the black and red frame around that is not. They're similar. Carvers that we've talked to since, Tommy Joseph, others, said that that's not buck teeth, that's a form line design tongue. And they all said they agree it's probably a bear. There are claws. The lower feet are kind of obstructed by the frames a little bit, but those feet are clawed. And some of the imagery that's on the sides of the heads looks a little bit more like eagle rather than raven. So they figured it was all crests on the eagle side and probably bears. They look very similar, but all 4 are very slightly different because there are actually a lot of intricate lines in here that we can't see, and we can't see with the camera either. These cameras do a pretty good job of catching these big, bold lines, and even a close-up shot, we photographed it every few feet, looking straight on. Even in this, we cannot see some fine lines that are there until you apply raking light to it to make those lines pop. So this screen was actually outside at one time, and the weathering wore down the wood around where the painted lines were. And if you look close, especially at the area around the eyes on this, I'll use my shadow to point with. See the lines right here around those eyes, circling those? So those are very thin lines that are just ridges of wood today. They had to have been black painted lines at one time. The weathering wore down the wood around it and then ultimately wore off the paint, so it created a real relief there. But it's hard to see that with the camera unless you use some rake and light. And we tried all kinds of 3D technologies, including RTI, reflective transference imagery, to try to get those to pop. That's supposed to be really good for flat things like tombstones and things like that to get that relief. And this object is so big and so broad, these 4 sections, that it's hard to get it to do that. And we think that it may be some of the most intricate form line design in existence on screens, but if it can be fully revealed. And so talking with Harold, we were exploring what are the options for trying to reveal this and kind of bring back its imagery. We had to go old school. We got a high school student who was interested in art to volunteer his time to come in, and we essentially erected this transparency grid of every inch in squares, overlaying it so it doesn't touch the screens, and he hand drew every inch of it. Unfortunately, his time with us was limited, and he was only able to get about halfway through one screen so far. But you can see line by line, we can then be sure, because some of this really takes an artist's eye also to tell what's been worn away, what likely continued, and he traced everything there. So we have these grids, these sheets, are 1-to-1 scale. And you can see from these some of the, actually, is there any way to cut the spotlights on this? We're washing out the screen on these lights. Anybody, thanks. I never understand why there's lights on the screen when you're trying to show something. Is that okay? You good with the camera? Okay, so there, I guess you can kind of see it there. And you can see the details in there. And he's marked what's in red and what's in black and what has no paint on this. The idea being, and these are the ones that we have so far, fused together, merged together there. And then the idea being that we should be able to take these and project these onto, going back the other way, onto a wall. Just like we're doing with this projector now, we should be able to project this onto a wall and trace it inch by inch in real scale. You could enlarge it potentially, but we should be able to do this a 1-to-1 scale. And so the idea, what Harold and I were talking about was, I think ultimately if we can get this done, and ideally done for all four, although one of these 4 panels is now on exhibit in Anchorage, and so it'd be harder to access, but the 3 that are still in the Natural History Museum, if we can find another dedicated art student to continue the project, then we should be able to draw these and then bring these patterns, these photographs of this to Wrangell, and we could project these onto a wall or onto a canvas or onto new screens and trace them every inch exactly the way it appeared originally, not the way it's cut now, not the way it's framed now, not the way the paint has been painted over, but restore it to the way it looked when it was first painted. And we think that that would be really incredible, would be beautiful, and maybe one of the best examples of form line design in existence. And so we hope that that's something that Wrangell Cooperative Association would support us in. If it is a Nanyai screen, because of the bear crest on it, I hope the Nanyai would support that. I hope that people who think this could be from their community would support possibly trying to do that, and see if we can find a way to work together to try to make something along those lines happen. But right now it's kind of brainstorming, but we've, in a sense, proved by concept, by doing what we've done so far, it can be done. Another potential collaborative project is Chief Shake's canoe. We have Chief Shake's canoe, or at least one of them. He was said to have had several canoes, at least 2. This one in this photograph is labeled the killer whale canoe, and you can see a pattern painted on the sides there, but no brown bears on the prow and the crest. And so to me it's a little confusing as to how many canoes are there and which ones are there. That pattern on there does not look like the pattern on the canoe that we have. And I found, actually some of these photographs I found in the book out here on the table, and this is a brown bear prow piece but no painting on it. The canoe that we have in the Smithsonian, as you see, has brown bears and painting. Here you see painting but no bears, or I mean no painting and no bears. Here you see painting that matches the paint pattern that we have on the canoe in the Smithsonian, but no bears as a prow piece or a stern piece. Here's a famous photograph you've probably all seen that clearly shows the bear prow piece. The bear stern piece is a little bit hidden, but no painting on the prow end. The canoe that was purchased and sent to the Smithsonian in 1893 is this canoe. When it came to the Smithsonian, it was hung in the Arts and Industries building along with many canoes, including a Kwakwaka'wakw canoe. but it was not damaged at that time. The Kwakwakwakan canoe was a little bit bigger, and it was cut in half to ship it to the Smithsonian. Luckily, the Chief Shake's canoe here was not disassembled or cut in half. So it was hung from the ceiling there until 1940 or 42, I think it was, when fear of German air raids caused the Smithsonian to take down all these canoes, fear of the possibility of that. It doesn't seem as likely to us today, but at that time it was a very real concern. And they took down a lot of canoes and objects and lowered them to the ground because they thought bombing would knock them down. And some objects were taken to some, I believe, caves in Maryland and kind of hidden away for a little while. I think it was after around 1942 they realized that probably wasn't likely to happen. They brought them back out, and they took it to the Natural History Museum, where it was stored in an open courtyard outside for many years, from the 40s until 1995. In our National Anthropological Archives, we actually have these drawings that are attributed to an anonymous draftsman, and they actually are not properly identified as being related to Wrangell or this collection. I will rectify that when I get back, because I had seen these before, and when we did searches in the computer, you're not going to find it if you search under Wrangell canoes and things like that. And so we will try to correct that. In some of our records, we saw a note that said that Bill Holm may have done these drawings. This is what the canoe looked like. That was hanging from the ceiling there, and with the painted pattern on the prow piece. That bear looks a little small to me relative to the rest of the canoe, so I'll have to check out the scale on that too. But that shows the killer whale at the front, and Emmons was involved in the collection of this canoe, and he described it as being called the killer whale canoe for the killer whale pattern on the prow, and that it had a raven pattern on the back representing his wife's moiety. And it was also called the brown bear canoe for the bears on the prow and the stern piece. So there's the center portion, and there's the prow portion. So we have a good idea of what this looked like. This is what it looked like when it was stored in the courtyard of the museum. And when I first came to the Smithsonian in the 1970s as a kid, I recall you being able to go up to these and hang on them as a kid and kind of, play on them. I don't remember playing on them myself, but I thought I saw them doing that, but I don't think there was much protection there for them. And they were clearly being weathered. And I think the museum painted these or restored that paint on them from time to time while they were out there. We don't have any good records of that, but they must have for it to be in the kind of shape for these photographs to have been taken in it, to be in that outside environment. Unfortunately, that outside environment really did a number on the canoe, and it is in a lot worse shape today. There were 5 paddles that also came in with it, and they have a mud shark pattern on them, as you see here. This is what the canoe looks like today in more recent times. It is still intact for its length, 45 feet long. I think it's something like 4 feet 8 wide or 5 foot wide and 4 foot deep. And the prow and the stern piece are off of it. It has kind of a marine paint painted on it. They painted all the canoes with this marine paint, I think, to try to help preserve them. But you can still see some of the patterns of the paint on the side. This is what the prow and stern pieces look like today and how they're stored at our museum support center in Suitland, Maryland. So once that facility was built, I think it was in 1995 when these were finally moved from the courtyard to our facility in Maryland. And you actually, in this shot, you see Chief Shake's canoe is actually under that long tarped piece in the back. All of the anthropology collections in this, what we call Pod 4, is our oversized collections area. In there you have gigantic stone Olmec heads, you've got dinosaur fossils, anything too big to fit on a normal shelf or a normal cabinet is stored in this pod. And anything anthropology has is fireproof, hand-sewn fabric over the top of them as dust covers to help try to protect them. So Shake's canoe is behind that, and then these the bear pieces are on a pallet that's across from it, so they can be brought out. And before I came to the conference, you can see the bears are missing paws, they're missing ears, missing teeth, eye inlays, they're missing a lot of parts, and they have a lot of wear on them. And before coming, I scanned the 3D scanner, I scanned the bear prow piece and the stern piece to see if it's possible to capture that. As some of you might have seen the presentation we did yesterday, and at past clan conferences, we've scanned clan crest hats for to document them and to archive them in case something happens to them in the future. And in 2019, we brought out a sculpin hat for the Kiksadi, where we remade a new hat from them from a broken hat in our collection using the 3D technology and restored that as Atu. It's now in use by the clan and is in Sitka. And so the technology, we think, has a lot of potential for restorative powers and to address damage and repair. So I scanned these to try to see what we could do with the scanners and to get some training in for myself to be able to come here to scan things, because this is the first time I've not been able to bring Smithsonian experts in digitization with me, so I have to do it all myself this time and figured out how to do it. But you can see the scale of this too now with me in there for human scale. They're pretty big. This is what some of the digital files are, a few scans that I did and captured. This is not done, but this is what it looks like as you start the process. More scans, more processing of files. And essentially, you can complete the entire shape of the bear, and where it is damaged, you can, if you have one ear, you can, in the computer, you could take the good ear and clone it and flip it around and graft it to the other one. So where it's missing a paw, you can take the good paw and graft it to the other one and replace these and repair this, and essentially digitally sculpt and repair it to where it looked like when it was new. And with some of those photographs that we have ideas about other pieces that are missing, teeth, inlays, things like that, that could potentially be digitally sculpted. And then it depends, what would you want to do with this technology then? You could completely restore it in the computer, and we could take the color from those images from the National Anthropological Archives and reapply the color to the sides of the canoe. So you could essentially recreate it as it looked like when it was new in 3D in the computer. Once it's in there as a digital file, people could zoom in on it, study it, turn it upside down over carvers. We know the Haida their carvers are very interested in studying this canoe and getting more access to it. And people can learn from it again and learn from it the way it looked when it was in good shape and in use, and not so much the way it looks today. Of course, some of the ways it broke are telling too about how it was carved. And this prow piece is actually in two different pieces. That slanted piece is a whole separate piece. These were bolted and screwed down onto it, and we have big iron bolts that bolted it to the canoe. And that causes me to seek an explanation for why did we see bears on unpainted and painted canoes and vice versa. I think maybe these bears could be detached from one canoe and put on another one. So sometimes it was on the unpainted canoe, sometimes it was on the killer whale canoe. I think that may have been how it was used, and ultimately the ones that came to the Smithsonian had both on it. Once you have the 3D models, you can also physically then remake these, as we did with the sculpin hat and the killer whale hat, and you could potentially print the canoe. These are 3D prints. If you haven't seen these already, these are spear throwers that we already did some spear throwing outside earlier today, and we'll do it a couple more times throughout the conference. But this shows the quality of print that can be made with this technology. They're really strong. Those are made out of high-strength nylon, so don't worry if you drop it, it's not going to break, because they're meant for being thrown and dropped. But these 3D prints can be printed really high quality, and sometimes then you could paint them to match the painting. You can either print them in color or hand paint them to look just like the original, or you can mill it out of actual wood like we did with the sculpin hat. So it depends on what the community, what the clans, what the Nanyayi might be interested in doing next with this technology, how it could be applied for cultural restoration purposes and educational purposes, we think. We were just talking, Mr. Martin was talking with me, asking could we mill smaller bears to go on the canoe that's in Chief Sheikh's house right now. And yeah, that's entirely possible, because you can scale these up or scale them down and make them bigger, make them smaller. You could essentially slice them in half in the computer and print just one half, show cross-section. As we showed with some of the clan hats in our talk yesterday, you could do that to show how they were made. We think there's a lot of potential with the material culture that the museum now archives and is responsible for, and a lot of potential to restore this knowledge to the community, this art, this technology to the community, and beyond, because I think the Haida, as I mentioned, are really interested. We are doing some 3D projects with the Haida as well, so we know they understand the technology and are interested in its application as well. Do we have any questions? I think that might have been my last slide there. Do we have any questions that Yes?
Very interested in getting our Cochiti plant hat scanned and replicated. What material do you use again if it's replicated?
Yeah. Well, I can certainly scan it for you today after this session here. If people are interested in seeing scanning in action, we are going to scan a couple of Klan hats in the front office by Cindy's office, just around the corner from the door, close to room 2. If you haven't seen us in there, that's where we'll be doing that. Scanning it is one thing, and at the Klan conferences, a lot of times we scan things and we archive them for Klan leaders in case something happens to them. If there's a fire, they're lost or something, it shows the technology could be used to aid this, or it could be presented to a carver if you want a traditional carver to use it as a model, because you can get exact measurements from the 3D scan as well. So it's options. Going ahead and making a duplicate of it, that's another much more serious issue, and how and for what purposes, and there are costs associated with it. But the ones that we've done so far, we did repatriate a killer whale hat to the Daklawedi. That's the first project that we did that for. Klan leader brought it back to us years later. We scanned it, and then we made an exact duplicate for us to exhibit at the Smithsonian. And the Klan sometimes actually checks it out to use as regalia. And actually, Edwell will probably come down for the Native American Veterans Memorial dedication November 11th. They'll probably check that hat off exhibit and wear it in procession as regalia. It's not considered atu by the Klan or by us, but it can be used as regalia as far as we're concerned. He would not want atu to be on exhibit like that. He wants it in use back here. So in a sense, we have the best of both worlds for that purpose. That was the purpose of that replica. For the Kiksadi project we did, we had a badly broken Klan hat in a sense like the canoe. Used the technology to digitize it, repair it in the computer, and we made an entirely new hat, which we gave to them, and they killed money on and brought out at Kuwait and made it the new Sculpin hat. So I don't call it a replica anymore. It's the new Sculpin hat. They allowed us to make a second replica of the new Sculpin hat that we exhibit at the Smithsonian to help tell that story of that collaboration. And that one is not considered atu. But we still consult with the Klan on how we do it and what stories we tell with it and make sure they're aware of everything. They're partners all the way from then on. The digital files we consider to be owned by the Klan. So we don't do anything more with it without Klan collaboration, consultation, and make clear that everybody's comfortable with what's done next. So there's a lot of potential to do things with it. And there are Klans talking with us about possibly making duplicates of hats that are badly damaged or at high risk. High risk, yeah. So the possibility of maybe retiring the old hat and helping to restore a new hat. And we don't see this as competing with carvers. Carvers that we've talked to, a lot of them are already still pretty busy. They see this as a new technology, a new tool that can be used or abused, but we've not seen them feel like it's much of a threat to them, and it can complement their work too, we think. Oh yeah. Well, we can certainly start today by helping you document it and archive it for security. And then where we go from there will be up to, let's continue to talk and consult, see what's possible. Did we have a question over here? No? Okay.
Do we have a way to reproduce soft materials like basketry or anything that's...
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. And that's why this is kind of prime candidate, because there's no soft material there. But with some of the other objects we've done, we can't. We would use real basketry material. On the killer whale hat, it had human hair coming off the dorsal fin. We used real human hair. For abalone shell inlays, we used real abalone shell. We added ermine skins. On the Sculpin hat, it had 175 holes in it where it had been repaired and modified. It had several reiterations. And we could tell from the position, we CT scanned it, so we knew the angle of every hole, the position and measurement of it. And we could tell there were things hidden in there. Sometimes they pulled whiskers out and then they painted over it, and you wouldn't see that with the naked eye from the outside. But with the CT scan, we see it. We see the size of it. And the Klan authorized us to pull little samples of organic material there, and we did protein analysis on them to identify this is ermine, that's deer, that's eagle. So we knew what materials were attached to it, even though we couldn't see them anymore. And the Klan used that to inform their decisions about what to remake it with, what to restore it to. And they had to choose, and that's why it looked a little bit different from the old hat, because they show us a combination of its different lives to be represented in the new hat. So it had parts of its different iterations. But for those materials, the 3D is still the old traditional leather work, feather work, things like that. So things like potlatch rings are a challenge. You could 3D print those. They would look solid, though. They would look the real thing because they look solid now, right? So you could print one, looking stationary, it would look just like potlatch rings. And then you'd use real ermine skins on the top. But if a clan wants to restore it and make it Otdu, wants to have as close to original materials as possible, and we do have a clan working with us now on that, and we're looking for weavers who can weave the potlatch cylinders, because we may want to have somebody make an actual potlatch cylinder to replace it. I think there's still a lot of the old school 3D work is just replicating the object in the old way. It's still placed right. This is just another tool. Any other questions? I think we might be over time. Okay. Well, thank Gunak Shish. So we'll do some scanning out there if you want to come see it in action.
Thank you.
Thank you.